Before we begin, viewer discretion is strongly advised. The following is for educational and entertainment purposes only. This is the verbatim federal courtroom testimony of the Sean Diddy Combs trial, as reported by Inner City Press. Nobody expected Justin Combs to take the stand against his own father. The room was tense. Eyes focused on the prosecution's table until the side door opened, and in walked Justin. Gasps echoed. Even the judge froze. No announcement, no pre-written statement, just Justin stepping forward on his own. Until that moment, he had stayed silent as his father's name swirled through headlines, court leaks, and whispered audio recordings said to be too disturbing to release. But something had changed. Maybe it was the mounting evidence. Maybe it was the betrayal he felt from the man who raised him. Maybe it was hearing those recordings played behind closed doors. Whatever it was, Justin was done being loyal to a father who had shown none. He wasn't on the stand as a celebrity's son. He was there as a young man who'd seen too much and said too little. And when he began to speak, the courtroom wasn't prepared for what they would hear. Because what Justin revealed about Diddy, the parties, the manipulation, and the control wasn't just explosive. It was a warning. It started like any other day of the Diddy trial. The room buzzed with low conversations. The press hunched in their designated rows, and lawyers whispered strategies as they waited for the next scheduled witness. But when the side doors opened and Justin Combs stepped into the courtroom alone, no entourage, no legal team, no announcement, the room changed. You could hear a pin drop. Some people thought it was a mistake. Others thought it was a stunt. But the way Justin walked, slow, deliberate, with his eyes fixed forward and jaw clenched tight, told everyone this was real. The judge raised an eyebrow, and Diddy, who'd been leaning back confidently at the defense table, suddenly sat upright. His face drained of color. Justin walked straight to the witness stand. No eye contact with anyone. He didn't even glance at his father. "I wasn't called to testify today," Justin began. "I asked to speak." The judge allowed it. And from that moment on, the entire trial shifted because what Justin was about to say wasn't part of any media narrative. It wasn't a social media leak. It was something that had haunted him for years, something that began at home, behind closed doors, where a son watched his father become someone he didn't recognize. "I've kept quiet my whole life," he said. "I've defended him to the press. I've stood by him at events. I've carried his last name with pride. But none of that can hide what I saw, what I experienced, and who made it happen." He turned slightly toward Diddy. "You did." Justin told the courtroom that it started, like many stories in his family, with what his father called celebrations of success. It came through regular family gatherings. The way they were framed, it was supposed to be normal. Diddy entertaining guests. Nothing wild, just music, networking. A place where the industry's elite could connect. I'd been to things like that since I was a teenager, so I didn't question it. But as Justin got older, he knew something was off. It was usually at one of his father's mansions. Black SUVs at the front. Security everywhere. The second guests stepped. Inside, phones were taken. That should have been the first red flag. They said it was for privacy, to protect the guests. But it felt like something else, like they didn't want anything getting out. If you're finding this story informative, please take a moment to like this video and subscribe to our channel for more breaking news and in-depth coverage of high-profile cases. Justin described how he was initially shielded from what happened in certain rooms. The lights throughout the house were dim, the music low and strange, ambient, rhythmic. almost hypnotic. There were no visible cameras, but there were mirrors everywhere. It felt like someone was always watching. Justin said that as he got older, his father gradually introduced him to more of what happened at these events. He said something like, "It's time you understand how we maintain our position." And he smiled. That smile, it wasn't warmth. It was a test of loyalty. Justin said he followed his father into a back room when he was 21, thinking they were going to discuss the family business. Instead, what he saw shook him to the core. There were people performing acts, men, women. Some he recognized from the music industry. Some looked uncomfortable, like they weren't there by choice. There were others watching like it was entertainment. And his father? He was directing it all like it was the most normal thing in the world. Justin paused, swallowing hard. I didn't know how to leave. And that was the point. Once you're in, you're in. Even as his son, Justin continued, his voice steady but hollow. A few days after witnessing this event, I confronted my father privately. I told him I was uncomfortable with what I saw. He just laughed and said, "This is how the real world works. This is how we keep everyone in line." Then he put his arm around me and said, "One day, you'll be in charge of all this." Justin testified that the fear he felt in that moment was unlike anything he'd ever experienced. I realized I wasn't being groomed as a son. I was being groomed as a successor to something dark. He said that's when he began to notice the manipulation. I'd hear my father on calls. Someone would decline an invitation, and suddenly their career would hit obstacles. A promised collaboration would fall through. A media story would appear out of nowhere. I saw it happen to people I knew, people I respected. Justin described one specific incident in 2019, when a young artist had been signed to his father's label. This kid was talented, probably the most natural talent I'd seen. But he questioned something at one of these events, tried to leave early. 3 days later, his contract was terminated. My father told everyone he was difficult to work with. I watched this kid's dream die in real time. He looked around the courtroom. My father didn't just ruin careers. He destroyed people. And that, Justin said, was what finally brought me here today. Justin paused, glanced at the jury, and leaned closer to the mic. It wasn't just the parties. It was the system. He said from that moment on, he began documenting everything he witnessed. Justin explained that his father's influence reached far beyond music. He had connections everywhere: police, media, executives in every industry. If someone needed a problem fixed, they'd call my father. If my father needed something covered up, he knew exactly who to call. He testified about a specific night in 2020 when he overheard his father on the phone. Someone was panicking about an incident at a hotel. A girl was hurt. I heard my father say, "It's already handled. The footage is gone. The staff won't talk. Just make sure she gets this settlement and NDA by morning." Justin said he confronted his father again. I asked him what happened to that girl. He told me, "Nothing that wasn't paid for." That's when I realized this wasn't just about parties. People were getting hurt. He described how his father maintained control through a combination of fear, favors, and finances. If you were in his circle, you had access to everything: connections, opportunities, protection. But the second you stepped out of line, it all disappeared. And sometimes, so did you. Justin testified that he began to distance himself from his father's empire. I started making excuses to miss events. I stopped bringing friends around. I tried to build something separate. But even as Diddy's son, there was no real escape. He started questioning my loyalty. He'd call me at all hours asking where I was, who I was with. He'd have people follow me. Once I found spyware on my phone. When I confronted him, he said, "Family has to stay tight. Too many people want to destroy us." Justin said the control extended to every aspect of his life. My friends, my relationships, my career moves. Nothing was really mine. Everything had to serve his interests. Justin's voice dropped to a quieter, deeper tone. I stayed quiet for years. I convinced myself it was normal, or that it wasn't as bad as it seemed. But then, the evidence started to surface in this case. He said the first time he heard about the recordings and videos being presented in court, he didn't believe it could be as bad as described. Then I got a call from my father. Not to check if I was okay with all this coming out. Not to explain or apologize. He called to remind me of family loyalty and that we close ranks when attacked. Justin described feeling like the floor had dropped from under him. That call wasn't about love. It was about control. That's when everything clicked. All those years, all those parties, all those business lessons, it was all part of a system designed to create complicity. Justin said he stayed up all night reviewing memories. The parties, the calls, the threats, the consequences for those who spoke out. It was all connected, and I was part of it, whether I wanted to be or not. He said the breaking point wasn't fear, it was responsibility. I realized that if I didn't speak now, I'd be perpetuating the cycle. More people would get hurt. More lives would be damaged. I couldn't live with that. He told the court he contacted the prosecution himself. I told them, "I'm ready. Whatever you need to know, I'll tell you." I knew what it would cost me. I knew my father would never forgive me. But some things are more important than family loyalty, like basic human decency. He looked at the jury. I wasn't just a witness. I was a participant through my silence. I enabled it by looking the other way. Then he looked at his father again, this time with a sharper tone. And you counted on that. You counted on me protecting you no matter what. Justin closed his eyes for a moment before speaking again, as if preparing to relive something he had fought to forget. When the prosecution asked if I had any physical evidence, I hesitated, he said. But I knew I had to. Come clean. I had been keeping a journal for the past 5 years, writing down dates, names, incidents. I recorded conversations when I could. I took photos of documents I found in my father's office. He described one document in particular. It was a list, names of people in the industry with notes beside each one. Compliant, resistant, leverage point, family pressure, financial control. It was a playbook for manipulation. The prosecutor approached with a sealed evidence folder. Your Honor, we'd like to enter this document as Exhibit 42. The judge nodded, and the bailiff carried it to the bench. Justin confirmed it was a copy of what he'd found. The names on that list, they're people whose careers mysteriously ended, people who suddenly disappeared from public life, people who, overnight, went from rising stars to industry cautionary tales, Justin explained. Next to each name was a vulnerability. For some, it was money. For others, it was family. For many, it was something recorded at one of those parties. Justin described how he discovered the document. It was after a particularly large event at the Miami house. Everyone had left, and my father was in a meeting with his closest associates. I overheard him mention the book and how someone needed to be moved to the handled column. The way he said it, it wasn't business. It was something else. Justin testified that he waited until his father left for Los Angeles the next day, then searched his private study. The document was in a safe behind his awards wall. I knew the combination. It was my birthday. That detail still haunts me. Using my birth date to protect something so destructive. He described photographing each page meticulously before returning it exactly as he found it. I didn't know what I was going to do with those photos. I just knew that someday they might matter. Justin said he handed everything over to the prosecution. They asked me why I collected all this. The truth is, at first, I thought I might need protection someday. Then, as things got worse, I realized others might need this evidence. The prosecutor placed a sealed audio file into evidence. "Mr. Combs, is this one of the recordings you provided to our office?" Justin nodded. "Yes. That's from December 2022. My father was on the phone with someone. I believe it was a network executive. A young actress had made accusations about something that happened at one of the parties. On that call, my father, he outlines exactly how her career would be destroyed if she didn't sign an NDA. Justin's composure wavered slightly. He laughed about it, said she'd never work again, and would be lucky to get a commercial in Nebraska when he was done. He said he owned enough people to make sure of it. When asked if there were other recordings, Justin confirmed there were dozens. Conversations about payoffs, about having people followed, about planting stories in the media, about making problems disappear. He explained how for years he watched his father's empire operate. It wasn't just about music or entertainment. It was about power, the ability to make or break people at will. The parties, the favors, the connections, they were all tools to create obligation. Once you took something from my father, he owned a piece of you. The prosecutor approached with another document. "And this email chain, can you tell the court what this contains?" Justin nodded. "That's correspondence between my father and several major label executives and radio station owners. They're discussing an artist who had refused to attend a private event. In those emails, they coordinate how to ensure his new single never gets airplay, how to have his tour dates mysteriously canceled, how to plant negative stories with specific journalists." He looked toward his father. Within 3 months of those emails, that artist's career was effectively over. He had to move back to his hometown. Last I heard, he was working at a car dealership. Justin described how he began noticing patterns. It wasn't just individual careers being destroyed, it was systematic. Anyone who stepped out of line, anyone who threatened to speak up, they weren't just punished, they were erased. He testified that his father had connections extending beyond the music industry. There were police officers who would make charges disappear, doctors who would provide whatever prescription was needed, hotel staff who knew to disable certain security cameras on specific nights. Justin's voice cracked for the first time. He looked down, collecting himself, then continued, "The hardest part wasn't collecting the evidence. It was accepting what it meant. That my father, the man who raised me, who I loved and admired, was deliberately hurting people. And he expected me to do the same someday." He recounted a conversation from his 25th birthday. "My father took me aside, said he was proud of me, said soon I'd be ready to hold the reins. Then he showed me a new section of that list. People my age, people I knew, friends, colleagues, even someone I'd dated. He had information on all of them. He called it my inheritance." Justin's hands trembled slightly. That night, I realized I had a choice. I could become him, or I could end it. There wasn't a middle path anymore. When asked what tipped the scales, Justin described a voicemail he'd saved. It was from a friend, someone who'd been close to our family. She had been at one of the parties. She sounded terrified. She said she'd woken up somewhere. She didn't recognize, that she couldn't remember what happened, but that she was hurt. She was calling me because she was afraid to call the police. What happened to her? The prosecutor asked. She disappeared for 2 weeks. When she came back, she had a new car, a new apartment, and she never mentioned that night again. She stopped making music, stopped going to industry events. Last year, she moved back to her parents' home in another state. He looked at the jury and said, "If you want to know how powerful my father is, ask yourself how his own son could be afraid to speak up for so long. Ask yourself how many others are still afraid, still silent, still trapped in his system." For his final statement, the judge allowed Justin to speak directly to his father. He stood from the witness chair, walked a few feet closer, and looked him in the eye. "You built an empire out of fear," he began. "You called it success. You called it the game. You called it family. But all you built was pain." Diddy didn't respond. He sat there motionless, his lawyer whispering in his ear. Justin didn't blink. "I saw what you did to those people. I saw what you did to me. I heard the things you said when you thought I wasn't listening. You broke people for power." Then Justin pulled something from his pocket. His childhood photos with his father. "This was me at 10 years old, idolizing you. That's the boy I used to be." He held it up to the court. He deserved better. Justin turned to the jury. "If you think this is just about parties or business practices, you're not seeing the whole picture. This is about a system designed to silence and control. And if we don't stop it now, it will continue." Then he faced his father one last time. "You always said, 'Can't stop, won't stop.' Well, I'm stopping it today." He walked back to the stand, picked up his things, and exited the courtroom without looking back. And Diddy. He sat there pale, unblinking, his fingers gripping the table. Because for the first time in decades, he wasn't the one controlling the narrative. When Justin Combs stepped down from the witness stand, he didn't look like someone who had won anything. He looked like someone who had finally broken free. The courtroom was still tense, almost unsure how to breathe again. Even the judge looked shaken. Some of the jurors had tears in their eyes. And Diddy, for the first time in the entire trial, looked defeated. Justin didn't speak to the press when he exited. He didn't wave, didn't posture. He walked out the front of the courthouse with his head held high, but his shoulders carried the weight of a lifetime of silence. When asked later by reporters if he regretted his testimony, he reportedly responded, "The only regret I have is not speaking sooner." But outside the courtroom, the world was only beginning to react. The music industry went into a quiet panic. Label executives called emergency meetings. Agencies paused contracts. Artists who had once proudly collaborated with Diddy were now issuing statements of shock and distance. Behind closed doors, crisis teams were activated. PR firms sent internal memos urging clients to remove any social media posts featuring Diddy. And while many tried to pretend they were shocked, the internet was already doing what it does best: connecting dots. Legal experts began analyzing the implications immediately. One prominent attorney told CNN, "What makes Justin Combs' testimony so damaging isn't just the emotional impact of a son testifying against his father. It's the detailed documentation he provided. Journals, recordings, photographs. This isn't hearsay. This is methodical evidence collected over years." The stock prices of companies associated with Diddy's various business ventures plummeted within hours. Brands that had endorsement deals with him issued statements about pausing relationships pending the outcome of legal proceedings. But industry, insiders knew, there was no coming back from this. What made the aftermath particularly significant was the ripple effect. Within 24 hours of Justin's testimony, 3 more witnesses, who had previously declined to testify, contacted the prosecution. People who had been afraid to speak were finding courage in Justin's example. Social media exploded with support for Justin. The hashtag #Justin Spoke Up trended worldwide. Survivors of industry abuse shared their own stories, many for the first time. It wasn't just about Diddy anymore. It was about a cultural reckoning that had been brewing for decades. Old interviews where Justin looked uncomfortable next to his father resurfaced. Photos where his smile didn't reach his eyes. Videos where Diddy spoke about training his children for success, while Justin stood silently beside him. People were seeing these moments with new eyes, recognizing the signs that had been there all along. Perhaps most telling was the reaction from other industry families. The children of several high-profile entertainment moguls made subtle but public shows of support for Justin. A like on his social media post, a brief statement about standing with those who speak truth to power. Small gestures that suggested Justin wasn't the only one carrying secrets. Fans weren't just shocked. They were supportive of a son who had to make an impossible choice, supportive of his courage to break the cycle, and angry that a system had stayed quiet for so long. Child development experts weighed in on the psychological impact of growing up in such an environment. What Justin Combs described is essentially grooming, one psychologist explained on a morning talk show. He was systematically desensitized to unethical and potentially illegal behavior. He was made complicit from a young age. Breaking free from that kind of conditioning takes extraordinary strength. Security footage from outside the courthouse showed something the media hadn't captured: Justin's siblings waiting for him. The embrace they shared spoke volumes. This wasn't just one son's betrayal. This was a family finding its way back to truth. The day after his testimony, Justin posted a single message online, a black-and-white photo of himself as a child. The caption read, "Truth is heavy, but lies are heavier. I choose light." Within hours, it became the most shared post in Instagram's history. 3 major documentary filmmakers reached out to Justin within days, but his representatives issued a simple statement: Justin testified to help achieve justice, not to achieve fame. He will not be participating in any media projects at this time. If this story moved you, please hit the like button and subscribe to our channel. We bring you the latest updates on high-profile cases with depth and accuracy you won't find elsewhere. Meanwhile, back inside the court, Diddy's defense team scrambled. Their strategy had been built on character witnesses and family loyalty. With Justin's testimony, that foundation had crumbled. In a desperate move, they filed a motion to have his testimony struck from the record, claiming emotional bias. What the judge denied it immediately. Legal analysts predicted that Justin's testimony would be referenced in law schools for generations to come. It's rare to see evidence this comprehensive from an insider, a former prosecutor commented. Usually in cases involving powerful figures, you get fragments, pieces of the puzzle. Justin Combs provided the entire picture. The financial implications were staggering. By the end of the week, Diddy's empire had lost an estimated $500 million in value. Companies were terminating contracts, partnerships were dissolving, and assets were being frozen pending the outcome of the trial. But the human cost was what dominated conversations. People who had worked with Diddy for decades were coming forward with stories that corroborated Justin's testimony. A former assistant described watching people transform from confident to broken after private meetings. A driver recalled picking up young people from hotels who couldn't remember how they got there. Perhaps the most powerful moment came a week after Justin's testimony, when the prosecution called a surprise witness, the friend Justin had mentioned, who had disappeared after calling him for help. Her testimony, delivered behind a privacy screen to protect her identity, confirmed everything Justin had said and added devastating details of her own. What Justin's testimony had done wasn't just personal. It had cracked the facade. And now, the truth was pouring out from every corner of an industry that had kept secrets for too long. The ripple effects extended beyond entertainment. Politicians who had accepted donations from Diddy's various foundations were quickly announcing plans to redirect those funds to survivors' advocacy groups. Universities with buildings bearing his name convened emergency board meetings to discuss renaming. Mental health professionals reported a surge in calls from people in the entertainment industry seeking support. What we're seeing is a collective trauma response, one therapist specializing in entertainment industry clients explained. People who have been carrying these experiences alone for years are suddenly realizing they're not isolated cases. They're part of a pattern. Justin himself remained largely out of public view in the weeks following his testimony. Sources close to him reported that he was in therapy, reconnecting with family members and focusing on healing. He didn't do this for attention, one friend told a reporter. He did it because it was right. Legal experts predicted that the case would likely never reach a verdict. The evidence was becoming so overwhelming that a plea deal seemed inevitable. But in many ways, the court of public opinion had already rendered its decision. As court adjourned that day, the judge made a statement that caught even the media off guard. What we heard today was not just testimony. It was an act of courage. And this court acknowledges the strength it took to deliver it. She continued, in an unusual departure from judicial reserve. Let the record show that this court recognizes the difficulty of testifying against family, especially a parent. Mr. Combs's willingness to come forward, despite the personal cost, exemplifies the highest purpose of our justice system, that truth must prevail, no matter how powerful those who would conceal it. The final image of the day wasn't of Diddy. It wasn't even of Justin. It was of the courtroom doors closing on an era of silence that had finally, irrevocably ended. And beyond those doors, an industry was beginning the long, painful process of reckoning with its darkest secrets. As one culture critic wrote in a widely shared essay, Justin Combs didn't just testify against his father. He testified against a system that values power over people, profit over protection, and silence over truth. In doing so, he may have saved countless lives we'll never know about. People who will now never have to experience what those before them did. There is no measure for that kind of courage.